The winter sun had barely risen when the world of Aldren Voss, a CEO known for his iron composure and cold distance, cracked without warning. It started with a small pastel envelope dropped at the reception desk of Voss Industries, a flimsy, innocent-looking thing that seemed entirely out of place in his steel and glass empire. But the moment Aldren's assistant shyly slid the envelope across his mahogany desk, everything inside him froze. On the front, in shaky handwriting, were 4 words that shook him deeper than any business loss ever could. "Please visit Daddy, he's lonely." The handwriting was painfully childish, uneven, the kind that belonged to very young kids. And beneath the note was a small doodle, 3 stick-figure girls holding hands, their tiny smiles crooked, as if trying to be brave. In that instant, Aldren felt something inside him crack open, releasing a rush of emotions he had kept buried for years. Despite being a man used to controlling markets, negotiations, and empires, he suddenly realized he was helpless in front of a note written by triplet girls he had never met. If you're watching this and believe in kindness, healing, and second chances, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Soul Moments Story, because stories like this remind us what truly matters. Aldren's life had not always been cold. Years earlier, he had once been a son too, a devoted one. But business, ambition, and the relentless climb to success had pulled him away from anything vulnerable. When his mother passed from a sudden illness and his father, Aldren Voss, withdrew into quiet grief, Aldren promised he'd be there more. But promises made in grief often dissolve in the grind of life's demands. Board meetings replaced bonding, deadlines replaced dinners, and soon months turned into years. Aldren buried himself in work until the only home he truly lived in was the top floor of his corporate tower. What he didn't know was that while he was drowning in responsibility, his father was slowly fading into loneliness in the small community hospital outside the city. Meanwhile, life inside that hospital was not defined by suffering but by the light brought in by Nurse Maren Kilbright, a woman with a quiet strength and the kind of smile that made people feel safe without a single word. Maren was the kind of nurse who never treated patients like cases. She insisted on celebrating the small wins, decorating the hallways for every season, and finding joy in the most unexpected places. She was also the temporary guardian of 3 little girls, triplets she had taken in after their mother, a distant cousin, passed away. These girls, Aster, Unia, and Kiri, were tiny bundles of curiosity and compassion, always following Maren in her rounds whenever she brought them along on daytime shifts. They loved the old man who always sat by the window, Aldren Voss. He reminded them of the grandfather they never got to know, and they became his brightest visitors. Roderick had told the girls many stories, including the one about his son, the CEO who had disappeared behind the castle walls of his own success. When the girls learned the old man had a son who rarely came, they felt a sharp kind of sadness. And in the innocence only children possess, they took it upon themselves to bring his son back. The note was their masterpiece of hope. Aldren found himself gripping the note for minutes that felt like hours. Something stirred in him, a mixture of guilt, longing, and an instinctive fear that time had already slipped too far from his grasp. Without telling anyone, he left his office, drove himself out of the city, and followed the address scribbled on the back of the envelope. He remembered the road. He had visited this hospital only once, years ago, before burying himself in work. The hospital had an entirely different energy now. Sunlight streamed in through decorated windows, children's drawings lined the walls, and nurses were smiling, something he didn't expect in a place of pain. But the warmest sight of all was Maren, gently tying a Christmas ribbon around a rail while the 3 little girls danced around her feet. Aldren stood frozen again, unsure how to approach. He felt like an intruder in a place full of connection. But when Maren caught sight of him, recognition flashed in her eyes. She had seen his father smile at pictures of him, had heard the stories, even if those stories carried both pride and hurt. She approached him with a calm, steady presence, sensing his conflict before he even spoke. She led him down the hallway toward Roderick's room with a softness that made him feel, for the first time in years, like he wasn't made of stone. When Aldren stepped inside his father's room, the sight unraveled him more than the note had. Roderick looked much smaller than he remembered, his once powerful hands resting lightly on the blanket. But his eyes were the same as they had always been, full of quiet strength and gentleness. Sunlight fell across his face, touching him with a warm glow, and Aldren felt like time slowed, wrapping them both in a moment he wished he had sought sooner. He stayed for hours, listening to Roderick speak in a wavering voice about memories he had long forgotten, moments they had lost, and dreams that had been placed on shelves for too long. The girls peeked in occasionally, their shy smiles brightening the air, and Aldren found himself smiling back, something he hadn't done without effort in years. Over the next several days, Aldren visited again and again. Each day, he felt layers of stress and ambition and loneliness peel away. Marin, with her gentle encouragement, brought small pieces of Christmas into the room, string lights around the window, little hand-painted ornaments from the triplets, and even soft carols played on an old speaker. She created an environment filled with warmth, making the small hospital room feel like the home Aldren never realized he missed. Under her care, Roderick's spirit seemed to revive. He laughed more, talked more, and seemed to glow from within. And Aldren, watching all of it, realized he was learning something profound, something he had been too blind to see for too many years. Success meant nothing without someone to share it with. But change is not gentle. It rarely comes without pain. One morning, as pale daylight spilled through the windows, Roderick collapsed. The emergency team rushed in, Marin among them, her face tight with urgency. Aldren watched helplessly as they worked, each second stretching like an eternity. Though they managed to stabilize him, the doctors later explained that his body was simply tired. Christmas might be his last. The words hit Aldren like a tidal wave, knocking the breath out of him. All the time he had wasted rose up in his chest like a stone he couldn't swallow. He sat alone in the hallway, hands covering his face, until he felt the small, warm pressure of 3 little hands resting on his arm. Aster, Unia, and Carrie didn't say anything, they just sat with him, their presence a reminder that even in heartbreak, kindness existed. As Christmas approached, Marin encouraged Aldren not to let grief steal the days he still had. She helped him plan something simple but meaningful, a small Christmas celebration in his father's room. The girls painted stars, Marin brought in a little tree, and Aldren bought gifts that his father would have laughed about years ago. The room glowed softly, warm and golden, as if time itself had paused to watch. And on Christmas morning, when Roderick woke to the light and love that filled the room, he smiled the fullest smile Aldren had seen in decades. It was a moment of deep healing, silent, powerful, and unforgettable. For a few hours, everything felt whole. Roderick passed 2 days later, peacefully and without fear, his hand resting in his son's. And though grief broke Aldren, it also rebuilt him. In losing his father, he finally understood the lessons he had been too busy to learn. He stayed connected with Marin and the triplets, visiting the hospital often, donating to the community programs Roderick once loved, and even helping expand the pediatric center in honor of the girls who had brought him back to his father. Over time, the cold CEO thawed into someone new, someone who valued connection as much as success, someone who could be gentle, present, and real. Months later, on a bright spring morning, Aldren stood outside the hospital garden where the triplets were planting flowers with Marin. The sound of their laughter filled the air like music. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging, of family, of hope. His father's memory lived in every warm moment, every act of kindness, every small miracle brought to him by a nurse with a generous heart and 3 little girls who believed loneliness could be defeated with love. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Soul Moment Story. Your support helps keep these emotional, inspiring stories alive.